we changed the channel and put Star Trek on and then put him to bed with dreams of a more hopeful future. But, the next morning we had to tell him, and it was really hard to explain that this person that we had been saying for months, like, this is a bully, this is someone we don't agree with, to have to explain that the country had, if not the majority of the country, at least the parts of the country that counted, had voted for him. And it's continued to be hard. Just last night, Teddy was asking again about how the Electoral College works and why that happened. Mm-hmm. And it's something that, even if you intellectually understand it, is difficult to explain.
The bully issue was something that really I'm having trouble with, because I'm trying to teach my son not to be a bully. I'm trying to teach him that we protect people and that we help people who need help and that we are kind and generous, and we, are always trying to aid the less fortunate. And I can't, it's really hard to try to instill these beliefs and then have a person who is in a position of power and a position of authority, a person who a lot of children sort of look up to by default, who people are going to tell him is a very important person, who embodies all of the things that I'm telling him not to be. And not just like, bullying and rudeness and just all the really terrible things that Trump has said and done, but like the toxic masculinity that is sort of at the heart of a lot of what Trump says. I mean, eventually, one day, Ren is going to be in school learning about the 2016 election, and they're going to bring up the grabbing of the pussy. Like, that's going to be a thing that he studies in school.
Yeah.
And I don't... how do you teach your kids to be good people when the people who are in charge of your government are such terrible human beings?
Yeah, so, obviously my kids knew I was knitting pussy hats because I was knitting them, like, all hours of the day, and so they saw me knitting them. And at one point, Teddy asked, why pussy hats? What does that mean? And at the time, I sort of punted on the question a little bit and said, well, it's a really easy shape to knit, and it's very recognizable as sort of a symbol. And those things were true, but I didn't want to explain further to a 5-year-old. And then I took him to the Women's March with me, and he said, Mommy, why does that sign say, keep your tiny hands off my pussy? Which is not a thing you want to hear your 5-year-old saying. And so on the one hand, it's terrible, right, that he was exposed to that, and the reason he was exposed to that is because our president said it. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, it was a really teachable moment, right, to talk about bodily autonomy mm-hmm. and, asking permission and not being a toxic mm-hmm. person. And so it's hard. It's hard to say these are the people in power, but these are not the people you should emulate. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, I think it is sort of forcing conversations that we might not have otherwise. And, there's a lot of research that says that, just exposing your kids to other races does not keep them from being racist. You have to talk mm-hmm. about racism, and you have to talk about, why we are not racist. And so what I'm trying to do is to use this all as a reason to have these conversations and to talk and to, we're not the first society to have to point out that our leaders are not good people, and mm-hmm. we probably won't be the last society to have to do that, unless we're, the last society ever, because it all goes up in a, mushroom cloud.
Or a giant hurricane.
Take your pick. But, I think that's kind of the best you can do, is just to be very deliberate about it. And it's hard with an 18-month-old, and it's hard with a 3-year-old. But, with kids who are slightly older, I think it's something we just have to not ignore or brush aside, because they're going to hear it. They're going to get it places. They're either going to hear the words, hear the president himself saying things, or they're going to hear other people talking about it. And so it has to be something that's explicit. And, I think you can't have those exact same conversations with younger children, but you can do what you're doing, and, to be very sure to talk about your own values and the kind of kid that you want your son to be. And the other thing that I've done a lot is sort of involve my kids in things. So the second welcome blanket that I'm just almost quite done with it is I had my kids pick out the yarn for it. They picked out the colors, and so they feel like they're involved in it. They've been to the Smart Museum several times with me. They've gotten involved in the project. They've been to some Indivisible events and some marches. And so, just sort of letting them know, this is what we do now.
That's a good point. My husband has actually been taking Ren to some protests at the Capitol against the governor. I think it's every Friday, maybe. They have a group that goes down and sings songs to protest Scott Walker at the Capitol building. And so Ren has been to a number of protests and thinks they're pretty cool. So
yeah, think about that. I didn't go to a protest till I was in my 30s, and, our kids have already been to them.
It's fascinating to think about, because I remember my mom telling me about, I think it was my mom telling me, and then my grandmother chimed in on the story. My grandparents were involved in the civil rights movement in the South, and my mother remembered some of the marches. My grandma would take her in a stroller to go to these marches, and there would be the KKK on either side of the road in their hoods. And my mom and my grandmother had these memories together of going to these protests. So yeah, it's kind of, I don't know. It's kind of heartbreaking in a way that I'm having that experience with my son, because it would have been great if that wasn't necessary. But
it would have been great if it wasn't necessary, but if it is necessary, it's great that we're involving our children.
That's true. So check out our email address. Can you tell us what that is again, Kelly?
Yes, it's twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com, and the 2 is TWO.
So send us an email if you have feedback, if you have things you'd like us to talk about, or you can tweet us. Can you tell us what that Twitter handle is again, Kelly?
Yes, and so that's Two Broads Talk. Again, TWO, Two Broads Talk.
Great. So that's our show. Join us next time.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Our theme music is called Sweeter Vermouth and was composed by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. It's licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0.